Welcome to this recording of the Activist Lawyer podcast, brought to you from the Granite Podcast Studio in the heart of Newry City. We are delighted that you could join us. We had a little break there for a couple of weeks. So this is our second series, and we hope you enjoyed the first series. We had lots of positive feedback, and we had lots of engagement on our blog as well. So let us know if you want to contribute as normal by checking out our www.activistlawyer.com. So back into the studio today, and I'm happy to say I am joined by a solicitor, a Northern Ireland-based solicitor called Ciarán Kerr Johnston. Hi Ciarán, you're joining us by phone today.
I am indeed, sir. How are you? Pleasure to be here.
I'm good. You're actually not too far away from me. You're pretty much maybe about 5 minutes away. I think you're working in Newry Courthouse today. So
yeah, we're in the Crown Court in Newry today, just with a trial ongoing here, and I'm sure you probably can't see me from your office where you are.
You're so good to set time aside for us. We were saying you could pop in, but no, just in case you're on call there and you need to scramble into the courthouse, we'll leave you there in your car. But it's all good. The sound's all good, and we'll get into talking about, I suppose, your work and a few issues that have come up in your work that'll be relevant for our listeners. But first, I'm going to give a brief introduction to our listeners. So Ciarán graduated from the University of Ulster in Belfast with an honours in law in 2017, so not too long ago, and completed his solicitor training at the Institute of Professional Legal Studies in 2019. He then undertook his apprenticeship specialising in criminal law, civil litigation and judicial review. Ciarán was involved previously in the Ballymurphy inquest, which we'll get onto a little bit later, which heard almost 100 days of evidence from more than 100 witnesses, including more than 60 former soldiers, more than 30 civilians and experts in ballistics, pathology and civil engineering. So a lot to take on board there. One area of practice in which Ciarán is involved in is personal injury and represents clients around road traffic accidents, accidents at work, tripping and slipping incidents, but regularly deals with High Court catastrophic injury claims involving paralysis, brain injury, loss of limbs and long-term care. In addition, Ciarán also undertakes a wide range of public law and judicial review matters, challenging the decisions and feelings of public authorities, and set a legal precedent in this jurisdiction wherein he became the first solicitor to conduct a PACE interview remotely via digital means, having raised a challenge against the PSNI on this basis. So we're going to get into that a little bit later. That's fantastic. You're also, Ciarán, behind the scenes, or maybe this is just as important as your work, a keen GAA player. Well, I think it's more than a keen GAA player. You're representing County Antrim at senior level in hurling. So, wow, that's a lot to take on. So again, thanks for joining us, Ciarán. And I think as well, it's great. We've had lots of queries in from solicitors. We're sharing a lot of our blogs and our podcasts with younger groups of solicitors who are just starting out or students. And we've had a great response from them just in terms of, getting involved in the areas of work that we're discussing, human rights and judicial review. We had a few lawyers on as well, similar to yourself, again in Northern Ireland. Yep. And this season, we hope to have a lot more engagement from people. So how did you get into this area, Ciarán? And, what advice maybe do you have firstly for aspiring lawyers to maybe get into the areas that you work in?
I suppose it was a family connection, really. I always remember I've always wanted to be involved in law of some description. I know that from an early age. And actually, it's funny, last Friday I had a conversation with Solicitor Reg Rankin of Green Rankin Lansing in the Falls Road, and I was laughing. He's the other side of the case to me, and I was actually telling him, by the way, Reg, not to make you feel old, but I did my work experience when I was in fifth year with you. And he was laughing. He said, well, at least then he must have had a good impression, and he certainly did. And I suppose I've did a couple of apprenticeships or indeed days here and there in various offices. And I suppose when you come from, especially I'm a working class family from West Belfast, and human rights is definitely an issue that it's always progressed, and especially within the north as a jurisdiction, you get civil rights and how important that is as a whole community and across the jurisdiction. And it's something I'm
quite
extremely
particular.
grateful.
the work that you do. I suppose we had Dara Mackin on as well. Of course, you know Dara from Phoenix Law and other solicitors who are dealing with uniquely Northern Irish cases. So you follow along a similar trail, I suppose. And living in West Belfast, I guess, you would be familiar anyway with a lot of the issues that had arisen here. So yeah, but it's tough going, I'd imagine. Or how do you find the work itself? And I guess you probably haven't been playing Gaelic for a while, or has that been maybe put on hold? How do you balance the two?
I have to say it can be challenging, and I suppose you always hear this term time management, and you do try your best. And I know you're probably in a similar boat, Sarah, and so many solicitors are. But if you have kids or any sort of family, but my other, obviously, I'm lucky enough that my partner, Sarah, she's also a solicitor, so she appreciates that the pressures there and the time. I was actually just when we're saying I recently just turned 27 there, so I'm getting old, I have to say. And,
you really are. You're pushing it.
I know, I can tell you, and the greys are coming slowly but surely. And but I was when people say to me, "Well, how strenuous or how time consuming is your job?" Well, I say, "Well, listen, you don't get birthdays. My 27th was on a Saturday, and I spent the whole day in Musgrave Serious Crime Suit. And I spent the next 3 days there, so but it's something I enjoy. Like, I am actually lucky to get up in the morning and say that I absolutely love the job that I do. And that's partly, that's down to the cases, that's down to the clients, down to especially the colleagues that I work with, and both solicitors and counsel. I have to say, I think when people say to me, "Well, it's an extremely tough job," but yeah, it's extremely tough, but tough job and massive rewards though when you're able to get success, or what clients deem justice, and exactly. Justice for clients can mean a variety of reasons depending on what area you're operating in. But I have to say, overall, I would always encourage people to get into law, and particularly human rights. I think it is, I know I'm biased on this point, but I think it is by far and away the most interesting and the most fulfilling in terms of job satisfaction.
It's certainly rewarding. It's full on, I guess. You're probably always switched on. That's one thing I've noticed about even myself working in human rights in the past 10, 15 years as well. It's not a job you can just switch off at 5 o'clock and you're not thinking about your work. You have to be committed and you have to be passionate. And I remember doing the PACE interviews. I mean, that's full on. You could be called at any time, and it's quite, it takes a special person. I do think it takes that kind of commitment and devotion to be able to do that. But it's great to hear, your perspective on it. And I suppose we should say you're working with Brentnall Legal, based in Belfast. So your firm itself deals with a lot of criminal justice issues anyway. And just in relation to that, we mentioned briefly there in the introduction, everything changed, I guess, with COVID and the way proceedings are handled and conducted. Criminal law did not escape that in any way. And I know, hearing from other solicitors, they found it extremely difficult to manage their workload and ensure that clients got access to justice, that they needed. You were really heavily involved in, I suppose, putting together a new digital mechanism to work as best you could and I suppose deliver justice to clients. That was back in April 2020. You acted remotely for a client in a police interview, and it was a first in Northern Ireland. And you issued pre-action proceedings against the PSNI on behalf of a client who was arrested at that time. How did that turn out? I mean, you were really using technology to its best, and it was something very unique and novel in this area. How has that developed, Ciarán? It's very important.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it was, it sort of just took me, when we were sitting we were thinking about it over, and I suppose it works because the advancements of technology that we have at our disposal, and when we were in the infancy of the pandemic at that stage in April 2020, and that particular client had been arrested on serious offences, and because obviously the Belfast solicitors had said, and taken precautions and necessary precautions in terms of health and trying to limit numbers of police stations, but I mean, access to justice is absolutely key, and I think one thing that my boss Michael would continually say, and I think it's a fantastic mantra to go by for anyone who deals with PACE or criminal law: your first interview or your first arrest is the first day of your trial. or any contest to come after it. So whatever goes on in there, whatever's said, whatever's not said, it has huge ramifications down the line for you. So, and as I said, with the advancements of technology, I mean, we have, as we all know, we have video links in courts. And I suppose it was just saying, well, why can't we do that mechanism for for arrests? You know, what is the difference here? Where do we draw the line? And I suppose, in fairness, the PSNI, and thankfully it has now been enacted, and it's in active use across, you know, for all solicitors. We're able to operate remotely, and particularly, I think it's a great aid for solicitors, because, as you said there, sir, you could get a call at 1 o'clock in the morning, 2 o'clock in the morning, you know, in the early hours, very unsocial hours for anyone to be dealing with. And, you know, I could be in Belfast, and a client could be arrested in Noma, and it makes it a bit more smooth, that transition, that you're able to link in, you know, and you're still able to provide the advices and the adequate advices to get the client legally briefed, and that they're content with what they're being provided with. But I would be a massive, I suppose there's a bit of a running joke in our office that they think that I'm a bit of a geek when it comes to pace, and you must be in the minority, who enjoy, particularly who enjoys arrests, and they're saying, like, you have a weird fixation with enjoying arrests, but I suppose it's definitely an area of law that I'm passionate about, and it was a big honour for me to be able to. I mean, when so many solicitors within the profession, so many colleagues have benefited from it, and I'm sure similarly clients have benefited from it, of course. And
so this is now being enacted. This is, you know.
The Law Society and the PSNI had then engaged in discussions,
right?
And in respect of the remote interviews, and that's now been it's a fully accepted practice now. And I really sincerely hope that it's a policy that continues, because, as I say, you know, in terms of limits the amount of times that solicitors are having to travel and clients are having to wait, and everything's just sped up because you have these accesses.
Yeah. Oh, that's such a big change. And I guess, so just to be clear, I'm not a tech person, but this is using Skype or Zoom, for example, to conduct the interviews remotely.
Yeah. And I think
we're used to now. I mean, you know.
Exactly.
And if you didn't have that, I mean, it severely limits fair representation, you know. So that's fantastic. And I look forward to seeing whether that is, you know, fully implemented and continues to be something that they use. And it'll be interesting to see how this fares out as well. I suppose employment tribunals were already being conducted to some extent remotely.
Yeah.
So we'll see. I'd say there will be changes in the legal profession, adapting more to technology. It makes sense.
Well, actually, there was a Shell and Benchy solicitors in Dublin.
Yeah.
Had they had contacted me after, I think it was just in around October, November, because in the south, solicitors can't avail of that. Clients can't avail of remote access even now, continued throughout. So they have contacted, and I've done a bit of work with them, and they put a paper forward to the Oireachtas for the Department of Justice for that to be for that practice to be rolled out. And I know I suppose they had asked me just what had been the mechanism, or how did we go about it, and what are the advantages, and you know, and just exploring it. And I know they have now submitted a paper to the Oireachtas, the Department of Justice, and they've quoted that case in particular of that client, and the remote means in the north has now been used. And I mean, that's fantastic for a whole island approach, you know.
It really is.
And to be able to be pushing the boundaries in terms of legal advices.
And maybe it took unprecedented times, like, you know, COVID and stuff to push. So there is something positive that came out of that. And I suppose we'll keep an eye and see how that develops. That's fantastic. Another area, you know, you've lots of different areas that you're involved in, but just for the purposes of this podcast, something we haven't touched on fully, but we hope to get more experts on to speak about their work around children's rights. And you in particular led a number of cases in relation to children's rights to education. You were instructed to issue pre-action correspondence to the Education Authority in Northern Ireland on behalf of a child who had been diagnosed with autism, and release a statement of special educational needs. So this child was struggling in mainstream school environments. How did that fare? You know, is that an ongoing matter?
So thankfully, in that particular case, sir, we got we got the best outcome for the child, and that child has now been placed within a school that can suit the child's needs. And I think this area in particular, I think has, especially in the current pandemic, I think two massive things within society have been addressed as such, or exposed more so, really, to be honest. And that's education and health. The pandemic has really scratched the surface and shown that years of systematic failures, to be honest, has now got us into the situation that we're in. And I mean, there was a report last year, and I think it was in the region that the EA, they have it approximated at about just over 2,000 children are statemented.
Wow.
Or are deemed to have special educational needs, and I think even that was just for those who were in mainstream school. You know, I think the actual figure when the Children's Commissioner looked into it was around 80,000 school-age children in the north had some form of special needs. You know, so that's almost a quarter of the pupils that you're dealing with, and if the adequate provisions aren't there, and I refer to the stakeholders as in, you know, the teachers and the children and any of the parents particularly, if they don't have faith in the quality of the system, you know, its accessibility and the value that's placed on the needs and the views of the children themselves, that's particularly concerning. And that's one area that, you know, it's for me, it's like anything. When you build a house, you have to get the foundations right. And so within society, the children, if we aren't providing adequate education for our youth, what does that then lead to at later stages? And that's the disadvantages, and that sort of ties me back into when you're in criminal law, you're working with those who are socially disadvantaged, those who are the most maligned in society. And when you strip that back, a lot of the times that reserves back to the, you know, education and not the adequate education being provided. And the old human rights isn't just one area. You will find that they go in tandem with one another. There are so many links and tentacles that when you add them all up, you say, right, okay, this is the reason, and this is what what it stems back to.
Well, I suppose it's similar. We had Ciarán O'Hare on here before. I'm not sure if you know Ciarán, another solicitor.
I do indeed, yeah. Fantastic.
In Northern Ireland. And similarly, he discussed hospital waiting lists in Northern Ireland. Obviously, the catalyst has been COVID and everything going around with the pandemic. But as you just said, these problems are already there. I mean, the issues around accessing adequate healthcare were already there. And he, like you spoke about, you know, the statutory obligation that, for in your case, the Education Authority has to provide or owes to citizens here. And I suppose we don't, you know, everyday life, we don't think about that, and we don't, I suppose, challenge the relevant authority. So this case that you're working on in terms of a child's right to education is another example of how to demonstrate, well, in fact, look, the Education Authority provides us, you know, and I suppose I think it's the Education Order 1998 provides a statutory obligation to make arrangements for the provision of suitable education for children. And again, it's only when you challenge it and, you know, you realise that it's not adequate and this provision hasn't been provided to children who need it. But the numbers are quite startling, aren't they? It's not even a case of, you have there was a report last year, and it was too little, too late. It was a rights-based review of the SEN, of special educational needs, in mainstream schools, and I am conscious that so many, and the EA, I'm sure they are doing their best that they can within, but it seemed that rather than that their placement was being decided upon resources as opposed to the actual abilities of the child, and that, you know, that's never going to, that's always going to be doomed to failure, and that is the concerning part, because every single child, then you're having to deal with, you know, the emotional and the mental difficulties that they're experiencing and the frustration they're experiencing, because and then that stems onto the parents, and the parents always want the best for their kids, and it's just a perpetual, you know, the perpetual system of that's under extreme pressure that really, I mean, I think in the new decade, new approach, that document published by the government, that
it had a commitment that the executive would indeed pursue an external independent review of the education system. And I think it requires a wholesale review. It's not simply there is one area in particular, but I think it's some of the cases that I've dealt with, and indeed I have a younger sister who's in secondary school at the moment, and education itself, because of the pandemic, has been difficult, and teachers have done their best to navigate. But special educational needs, in particular, has been a real concerning area because of the enhanced provision that they should be afforded. Yeah. And so many schools have stayed open and done the best. But again, it's an area that's, as Ciarán has touched upon in terms of health, education is underfunded. And you're talking about education and health are two of your bedrocks of a society. If you don't have, especially a democracy, and if you don't have either of those, and freely, just like justice, if they're not freely accessible, then you despair as to what then is the outcome and the pressures that come with it. So it is certainly for me.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very difficult one, the health and the education pieces that we've covered then. The stress on, obviously, people who are affected and parents, we all know somebody in that position. And I think just watching what's happening across the border, it's similar. And we've spoken to solicitors there who are kind of leading the way, similarly to yourself, on children with special educational needs. So again, the spotlight shines on these issues, but again, they've always been there, I mean, best of luck with that work, and I guess it's ongoing, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely.
We probably will touch on as well. We spoke a bit about the fact that we're here in our unique part of the world in Northern Ireland, and your role as well. So I think prior to you working in your current position, you had been involved in something known as the Ballymurphy inquest. Not all of our listeners will be familiar with it. So do you want to just touch on your experience there? I mean, you're probably quite newly qualified then, or when?
Yeah, no, I was actually I was an apprentice at that stage, and that's why it was a fantastic exposure for me. My apprenticeship, it was on Murray Solicitors in Springfield Road, and part of Murray in particular, as a solicitor, it's the amount of monumental inquests and other human rights work that he's done himself. It's the list is endless. It's testament to him, and I have to say I was extremely lucky that the timing of my apprenticeship coincided with the Ballymurphy inquest being conducted, and it was very moving at times, I have to say, very emotive, when you see the families and some of the evidence that was being given and their reaction to their loved ones, and indeed you had the likes of Michael Mansfield QC and anyone who's within the legal profession. You're talking about probably the foremost human rights QC that there has, for me, that there has ever been. A guy who's been involved in Bloody Sunday, Hillsborough, Grenfell, the list again for Michael, and to see practitioners of his quality and just really espousing everything that's good about human rights lawyers.
Absolutely.
And seeking justice for the families was absolutely incredible, and I have to say it was a pleasure for me just to be there and witness it. I know Dara was involved as well, and he had previously touched upon that, and I think in particular just because of you had Bloody Sunday and then Ballymurphy were in short succession of one another.
That's right.
As you said, Sarah, we are in a unique situation. The Troubles was a very difficult time for so many, and we continue to this day to try and address issues that have been as a result of that period. And I suppose the legal profession as well, you're always trying to seek truth and justice for our clients, especially particularly legacy, when anyone who loses a loved one, but in circumstances of that nature. And I have to say that when you see the reaction of clients of those who have lost loved ones and the avenue that an inquest provides in terms of transparency and truth, and it's closure for so many people, and that's what it is. It's closure, and it allows them to accept that what has gone on, and they now can move on content that they know the exact truth of what happened to their loved ones. And I have to say I would be a massive advocate of legacy inquests, they've come under fire. It's I think the Prime Minister certainly hasn't with his comments, and I think that the whole creation of this podcast in particular in relation to lefty lawyers and how they're being hamstrung, and it's extremely disingenuous and dangerous on their behalf to be for so many, and I know you're well aware of that through the great work that you do there. And I think legacy inquests in particular are very unique to this jurisdiction.
Unique and important, and I suppose there's still a lot of work to be done. Some people are still waiting for their day and waiting to to get justice for their families and their loved ones, and it's difficult times because all of this is mixed in with the current I guess it's a very unstable political climate, where we're starting to see maybe a little bit of instability when it comes to Northern Ireland as a result of, the discussions around the protocol in place now, the border. So, I mean, how do you see, and this is probably a difficult one, it's not one that maybe anybody can answer, but the work that you're doing and the continuation, I suppose, of all activists, lawyers, experts, representatives of families who, are still seeking justice, they still need to have the government and former actors, I suppose, held accountable. They're waiting on apologies, redress, etc. How do you think that will continue, or do you think there will be somewhat of an interruption there because of what's happening around, I guess, Brexit is what's leading everything, to one side? It's sort of, even for legal practitioners, there is somewhat uncertainty there in terms of we have our own office of a few judicial reviews at the moment in respect of legacy inquests, and they've been somewhat stayed because of the transition period, obviously because of any reference to the Article 2 compliant inquests at the European courts. So that is. We hope that it will continue, and that I think more than ever, the clear and principled voice of the legal profession is needed. I mean, because for any democratic society, the legal profession, and especially through judicial review, you've seen that it's come under attack last year, and then it was included in the Tory exactly the Tory manifesto about we need to dilute and we need to reduce the influence, but that. Judicial review and the judiciary in particular for me are an absolute essential part of the checks and balances. I mean, it's even shocking.
Within.
It's shocking to contemplate that was a matter that you have to grapple with,
Exactly. And I think it's just, as I said, we have to ensure, I've seen some of the chat about this review of judicial review. Indeed, the Law Society in the North here had actually put out last year that they had got a cohort of practitioners together to discuss administrative public law and judicial review and its powers. And I have to say that judicial review in its current format is probably the last bastion, or the last real effective means of holding government and governmental agencies to account. It gives individuals a voice, and you've seen so many fantastic examples over the past 12 months with all the disruption. And for me, judicial review, for anyone who's wanting to get into law, or anyone who wants to become excited or read up on cases, judicial reviews are fantastic. It really it gives the individual an opportunity to say, no, this is wrong, and this is why, and it keeps, as I say, it's an essential part of the checks and balances.
Absolutely.
And we have to have that oversight and scrutiny. Otherwise, God knows where that leads us to in terms of governments just acting in a single-minded manner, and certainly not operating at the will of the people.
Of course, and that coupled with, I suppose, the failure to provide adequate legal aid as well. Particularly if we're dealing a lot with solicitors who are just finding it almost impossible in Northern Ireland to continue their work. It's quite...
In the era of fake news, that's what it is. It's that the headlines being... and the attention's being drummed up about fat cat lawyers.
I'd love to meet a fat cat lawyer in
exactly. And as you said, if you were saying to someone, what profession would you go in where it's a 9-to-5 job? It certainly wouldn't be law. And if you were in law, you go into law for for personal reasons and for reasons that you want to make a change within society.
Yeah.
So I don't even think, like, for you and I, the whole fantasy of a 9-to-5 job, it's not within our. We don't contemplate it because we're happy to do the work, because we enjoy the work, and because you believe I'm genuinely doing the right thing here.
Yeah.
I'm fighting the good fight, and I'm trying my best here to enhance the lives of others. And enhance society. Sometimes, and particularly the last number of months, I think it's been particularly important for society as a whole to see, perhaps hit the reset button and consider what's really important. And
exactly.
I think it's very important, as you said about legal aid. It really does. I have to say, I could go off on one, but it infuriates me when
I know. I mean, we're in a group as well, a working group around it, just dealing with the issues in Northern Ireland. I have to say, some of the solicitors' stories are absolutely appalling. The hours that they put in for nothing. Basically, it's nothing. Yeah. So we really need an overhaul as well. And again, as you say, any threat to any mechanism like judicial review just cannot be tolerated. And this is why, I suppose, we, in here, and a few of my colleagues thought about activist lawyer, because we were so incensed at the government's proposal to, attack the legal profession this way. And you referred to the other phrases that we use, the lefty lawyers and the do-gooders. We're not just talking about lawyers, it's the campaigners, the activists who work hand in hand a lot of the time with lawyers to kind of push issues forward on behalf of people who are perhaps more vulnerable and don't have a voice. And I'm glad that most people held on to that phrase and really owned it, activist lawyer, and didn't, kind of stirred people to work harder and push their cause further and really stand up in the face of a governmental attack like that, which was absolutely appalling. But you're right, we still need to keep an eye on other issues like legal aid, and like judicial review, and ensure that these remain in place and are improved. Absolutely. So that people have better access. And just on that, I suppose we'll finish up in terms of activist lawyer and what that means to you, and how important is it to you that activism continues? I mean, you've touched on really important issues there. We probably talk all day on these matters, but just for any of our aspiring lawyers listening as well, I mean, would you recommend, you've already mentioned about the importance of your work and how you would recommend human rights, but activism, how should we keep our finger on the button, and how important in these times is it to remain vigilant and press on?
Yeah, I would say one thing I particularly enjoy, and I think it's a fantastic way to continue to better yourself, I suppose, and that, as an activist and as a solicitor, you always, I suppose, I take out from sport, how you want to push on and you want to be the best that you can be for your clients. And I think reading in particular is a great, there's some fantastic blogs. I think like Joshua Rosenberg there and David Allen Green, they always produce really interesting law blogs, and like just, I suppose, newspapers and on various aspects. But I would say it's all around us. We have free access to media as much as we can get it. And I know we're in the age of fake news and whatnot, but there are so many ways in which, and I'm saying about even, I know it sounds not the greatest of, or not the most interesting of Saturday nights, but if you're going to have an opportunity to go over cases and just read various aspects of it. But I think constantly reading newspapers and reading blogs and saying, because it's important to get that different perspectives also. You have to appreciate that you have to be flexible in some regard. And but I think activism in general, I think this podcast, and as you said, that those comments, Bri Pretty Patel, have worked conversely, and they certainly solidified the profession. And if we were feeling somewhat disparaged there, it has rejuvenated so many of us to say, no, we are doing the right thing here, and know that this is the right, this is a cause that we're fighting for, and this is why I get into law in the first place. Absolutely. And this is why I chose this profession. And I think that's for us, I think that's it's a great place to be in, and it's something that we should relish, and we owe it to our clients, and we owe it to our colleagues to hand in hand, work in tandem to make things, and make society a better place for all.
Absolutely. Well, as you said, there's so much out there. There's so many resources and so many great lawyers like yourself. We've been so lucky to meet so many and have them on this show, and we look forward to our future guests. But I think, that's fantastic advice for anybody listening who's interested in this area. And Ciarán, God, we hope to have you back again to check in with you around. And I know you're close by to us. I'm hoping your case goes well today in your fitness in between your very busy schedule. But it's been absolutely great to have you, and thank you for sharing your insights and your opinions as well. It'll be very valuable to so many listeners. And
thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem. Well,
really appreciate it.
We'll talk to you again. This has been the Activist Lawyer podcast. I'm Sarah Henry, and we look forward to speaking with our guest next week.